in many ways, the American response to the British invasion that was folk rock was really launched in the summer of 1965, and Mr. Tambourine Man, a song written by Bob Dylan but not yet released by Bob Dylan as in his own performance, but rather the recording of it by the Byrds, a Los Angeles-based group, really is maybe the beginning of what we could think of as a significant American challenge to the success that so many British bands had with the Beatles, and in the wake of the Beatles, all those groups sort of flooding to these shores, having tremendous hits on the charts, and maybe throwing the American music business into a bit of a tizzy. But of course, it didn't take them very long to respond, and Mr. Tambourine Man is a great example of that. Interestingly, however, Mr. Tambourine Man brings together a lot of things that had been happening up to this point in popular music, both American popular music and as part of the British invasion. The song, as I mentioned a minute ago, is a song written by Bob Dylan, but it had not been yet released by Bob Dylan. He'd recorded it, but the recording of it he wasn't happy with. The Byrds producer, Terry Melcher, got a copy of that. The Byrds learned the tune with Dylan's blessing. Initially, they played it the way they had done, as a kind of a vocal folk group, with Roger McGuinn playing the song on his acoustic 12-string guitar. In fact, there are recordings available of them doing this as the Beef Eaters, with the initial jingle jangle famous signature lick played on the acoustic 12-string guitar. But in the summer of 1964, late summer of 1964, the guys in the Byrds went to see A Hard Day's Night, as did almost everybody. It was a fantastic happening to go and see A Hard Day's Night at the theater that summer. And they happened to notice that George Harrison was playing a guitar that, when looked at from the front, looked like a regular 6-string guitar. You could see the six tuning pegs, 3 on each side. But when you looked at it sideways, you could see that there were an additional 6 tuning pegs there to make it a 12-string electric guitar. They loved the sound of it. Roger McGuinn, as the story goes, traded in a couple of his instruments. I think it was a banjo and an acoustic 12-string, something like that, and got his own his own Rickenbacker electric 12-string. It turned out the guitars were made right there in Southern California, where the Byrds were based at the time, having moved some of them from Greenwich Village in New York, where they were part of the folk scene earlier in the decade. And so they got that electric 12-string, put the Beatles electric 12-string on that introduction, which Roger McGuinn says was influenced by Bach's Jesu, Joy of Man's Desire. They add the Bob Dylan song to it, and then it turns out that the only Byrds member actually playing on the recording is Roger McGuinn playing that electric 12-string. The rest of the people playing on the recording are members of the famous LA studio group, not an official group, but a community of musicians who played on a lot of those big hits, called the Wrecking Crew. And so the Byrds are singing, Roger McGuinn is playing, but the rest of the guys on the Byrds were sort of invited off the session in terms of laying down the backing tracks. You get an interesting combination of all of these different things. The Wrecking Crew, who'd played for Phil Spector, but most recently the Beach Boys. In fact, the groove that they use there is one that comes from the Beach Boys song Don't Worry Baby, which some of these guys had done the session for. So they take the Beach Boys groove, Phil Spector's studio band, you got Bob Dylan song, a Beatles guitar, a reference to J.S. Bach, and you put it all together and you get something called the American response. The track itself is really rather simple. Starts out with that famous guitar introduction. You get the chorus sung in harmony, then you get the verse, 25 minutes of that in a kind of a very kind of text-rich Dylan kind of thing, lots of words there. The chorus comes back, and then they go out the same way they came in. The whole song, 2 minutes and 15 seconds, very much the perfect length for an AM single of the day. The actual Dylan version has got more verses, at least a second verse, I think maybe a third verse, maybe only 2 verses, but they cut that down because they had to get it right down to 2 minutes, or maybe 2.5 minutes to really sort of fit on the radio. So you take all those things, you put them together, and you get the big response in the summer of 1965 to the British invasion, folk rock.